My daughter Clara thought I was just her live-in servant, not her mother. When I found my old photo crumpled in the trash, her own son explained, Mommy only keeps pictures of people she likes. I just nodded, a quiet fire igniting within me. She had no idea I was meeting my late husband's attorney that very evening. I'm glad you're here. Like, share, and let us know where you are listening from as my story unfolds. The morning began, as many mornings now did, with a quiet hum of chores Eleanor felt compelled to undertake. She moved through the kitchen, a space that was once entirely her own, now a battleground of misplaced items and passive-aggressive notes. Her hands, still nimble despite her 70 years, reached for the kitchen trash bin, intending to empty it before anyone else stirred. That's when she saw it. Tucked beneath a crumpled paper napkin in a discarded coffee filter was a photograph. It was an old picture of her, younger, vibrant, with her late husband Thomas by her side. They were smiling, caught in a moment of pure, unadulterated joy from a long-forgotten family vacation. Her heart gave a little flutter of nostalgia, a bittersweet pang for a time when her life felt whole and cherished. But then she noticed how the image was creased, folded haphazardly, almost as if someone had deliberately tried to disfigure her face before discarding it. A knot tightened in her stomach. Who would do such a thing? Just then, 7-year-old Ethan ambled into the kitchen, his morning hair a tousled mess, his eyes still heavy with sleep. He was a sweet boy, untainted by the complex resentments that simmered beneath the surface of their household. He pointed a small, curious finger at the photo in her hand. "Grandma, why is your picture in the trash?" Eleanor knelt, her knees aching slightly, but her gaze fixed on her grandson. She tried to keep her voice light, though her heart was already aching. "I don't know, sweetheart. Do you recognize it?" Ethan nodded, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's from the old album, but Mommy said we only keep pictures of people Mommy likes in there now." He shrugged, a simple, innocent explanation that plunged a dagger directly into Eleanor's chest. Her long-held suspicions about Clara, her 39-year-old daughter, solidified into a crushing certainty. It wasn't just the casual dismissals, the forgotten birthdays, or the way Clara had slowly but surely taken over every inch of Eleanor's house and life since Thomas had passed 7 years ago. It was this deliberate act of erasure, a physical manifestation of Clara's desire to edit Eleanor out of existence. "Mommy said," Ethan continued, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his grandmother's eyes, "some people don't deserve to be remembered." The words hung in the air, cold and stark. Eleanor felt a chill spread through her, despite the warmth of the morning sun filtering through the kitchen window. Some people don't deserve to be remembered. Was that truly how Clara saw her own mother? A person so inconsequential, so undesirable, that her very image was relegated to the refuse bin? The clatter of high heels echoing down the hallway announced Clara's dramatic entrance. She swept into the kitchen, a vision of polished efficiency in a tailored pantsuit, her phone already pressed to her ear. She was talking loudly, her voice sharp with irritation. "I told you, Janet, the carpool is not my responsibility this week. And honestly, the coffee better be ready. I swear, if it's not..." She trailed off, spotting Eleanor by the trash bin. Eleanor, still holding the crumpled photo, met her daughter's gaze for a fleeting moment. Clara merely raised an eyebrow, a silent judgment that Eleanor was already being inefficient. Eleanor had deliberately put the coffee away the night before, a small, almost invisible act of rebellion in a life full of compromises. A tiny way to assert some control over her own home, even if it only meant Clara had to search for her precious morning brew. Clara ended her call with an exasperated sigh, then turned her full attention to Eleanor, her tone already dismissive. "Mother Good, you're up. I need you to watch Ethan and Sophia tonight. Mark and I are going to Janet's for her little gathering, and it's simply too much hassle to find a sitter on such short notice. They're expecting us." She spoke as if Eleanor's agreement was a foregone conclusion, a mere formality before she moved on to more pressing matters. For 7 years, Eleanor had played this role: the live-in grandmother, the unpaid nanny, the chef, the cleaner, the silent observer of her own diminishing life. 7 years since Thomas died, and Clara, with her husband Mark and their 2 children, had moved into Eleanor's spacious, paid-off home, ostensibly to help her grieve. Instead, they had slowly, meticulously taken over. The crumpled photo in her hand, the casual cruelty of Ethan's words, were the final unbearable weight. Eleanor took a deep breath, surprising herself with the sudden resolve that bloomed in her chest. Her voice, when it came, was steady, a quiet tremor that even she hadn't expected. Actually, Clara, she began, the words feeling foreign yet incredibly liberating on her tongue. I have plans tonight. Clara paused, her hand hovering over the coffee maker, a look of incredulity slowly spreading across her face. Plans? Mother, what on earth are you talking about? You never have plans. The accusation in her voice was clear. How dare you disrupt my convenience? I do now, Eleanor replied, her grip tightening on the photograph. I'm meeting Arthur Hayes. Clara's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine surprise replacing her annoyance. Arthur Hayes was Thomas's attorney, a name synonymous with legal documents, wills, and the solemn finality of affairs. Arthur Hayes, what for? Her voice was sharper now, tinged with a sudden, unsettling curiosity. Eleanor didn't elaborate, not yet. She simply held Clara's gaze, the silence stretching between them, thick with unsaid things. 7 years of biting her tongue, of watching her beautiful home transform into a place where she felt like a guest, an intruder in her own life. 7 years of being a servant, as Clara often implicitly, and sometimes explicitly, treated her. The crumpled photo was more than just a picture. It was the broken pieces of her dignity, painstakingly pieced together to form an unshakable resolve. It was the spark that ignited a long-dormant fire. Clara huffed, a dramatic exhalation that indicated her extreme displeasure. Fine, whatever. I suppose I'll have to call Kelly. It's an absolute nightmare, Mother, you know that. She stomped off, already dialing on her phone, leaving Eleanor alone in the quiet kitchen, the crumpled photo still clutched in her hand. Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat across from Arthur Hayes in his quiet, wood-paneled office. Arthur was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes and a thoughtful demeanor, a comforting presence who had known her and Thomas for decades. He listened patiently as Eleanor, her voice low but firm, outlined her intentions. It's time, Arthur, she said, her gaze steady. I can't live like this anymore. She carefully unfolded the crumpled photograph, smoothing out the creases as best she could, then slid it across the polished desk toward him. This, she explained, her voice thick with emotion, this is what it's come to. They're erasing me, Arthur, from my own home, from my own life. Arthur picked up the photo, his expression softening as he recognized the younger Eleanor and Thomas. He nodded slowly, his understanding evident. I see, Eleanor, I truly do. This won't be easy, you know that, don't you? There will be significant pushback. Eleanor met his gaze, her resolve unyielding. I know, but I'm ready. For 3 days, the legal papers Arthur Hayes had given her sat untouched on the corner of her antique writing desk. They were neatly stacked, a stark white testament to the seismic shift she was contemplating. Each time Eleanor passed by, her eyes would snag on the crisp edges, a mixture of apprehension and grim resolve tightening her chest. She hadn't procrastinated out of indecision, but out of a need for one final agonizing review of the past 7 years. It was as if her mind, like an old film projector, insisted on replaying every frame, every slight, every broken promise that had led her to this precipice. The first reel began 7 years ago, a jarring flashback to a frantic phone call. Thomas had only been gone for 6 months, and Eleanor was still navigating the raw, gaping wound of his absence, the quiet echo in their once vibrant home. Then Clara's voice, usually so composed, had been a tremor of barely controlled panic. Mom, you have to help us. David, he lost his job. Again. They're threatening eviction. We have nowhere to go. Ethan, he's so scared. 7-year-old Ethan, then barely a toddler, was indeed a powerful card. The thought of her grandson, homeless, adrift, had pierced through Eleanor's own grief, igniting an instinct to protect. Just for a few months, Mom, Clara had pleaded, her voice laced with desperation. Until we get back on our feet. We promise, as soon as David finds something stable, we'll be out of your hair. Eleanor, still reeling from her own loss, had wanted to believe her. She'd wanted to believe in the temporary nature of their crisis, in the filial bond that would surely see them through. She opened her home, a haven of peace and memory, to her daughter and her struggling family. The move-in was chaotic. David, Clara's husband, had complained incessantly about the size of the moving truck, the traffic, the boxes, anything and everything. Eleanor remembered patiently directing them, her energy already draining from simply observing his endless grumbling. Clara, on the other hand, had wasted no time. Before the last box was unpacked, she was already asserting her presence, suggesting improvements. The old, faded floral wallpaper in the guest bathroom, a pattern Eleanor had chosen with Thomas years ago, was immediately deemed dated. Within weeks, it was replaced with a stark, modern geometric print. Clara had not asked. She had simply declared. It was the first, almost imperceptible chip in Eleanor's sense of ownership. Then came the second unexpected turn, another extension of their temporary stay. Barely a year after they moved in, Clara had announced her pregnancy with Sophia. Eleanor felt a surge of grandmotherly joy, of course, but it was quickly tempered by the deadening realization. A baby meant a prolonged stay. How can we possibly move now, Mom? Clara had reasoned, her hands already caressing her burgeoning belly. With a new baby, the expenses, we need stability. Just a little longer. And just like that, a few months stretched into the foreseeable future. David did eventually find a new job, a steady position in sales that paid well enough. Yet the refrain never changed. We're saving up, Mom. It became their mantra, a convenient excuse for why they couldn't possibly contribute to the household expenses or find their own place. Years melted into one another, marked not by their departure, but by Eleanor's increasing invisibility within her own four walls. Her 65th birthday stood out as a particularly bitter memory. It was a milestone, a quarter of a century beyond 40, a moment she had quietly envisioned celebrating with her family. Perhaps a small dinner, a heartfelt toast. Instead, she had walked into her own dining room to find Clara and Mark hosting a lively dinner party for their friends. The table was set with her best china, the air thick with laughter and conversation. She had stood in the doorway, a ghost in her own home, until Clara had finally noticed her. "Oh, Mom, you're up. We didn't think you'd be interested. It's just a few of our friends from the club." The casual dismissal, the unspoken message that she was not only irrelevant but actively unwelcome, had stung with a force that still resonated. Eleanor had quietly retreated to her bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration below, a solitary tear tracing a path down her cheek. The smaller indignities accumulated like dust bunnies under the furniture. Her favorite armchair, a comfortable faded piece where Thomas used to read his newspaper, vanished one day, replaced by a sleek, modern recliner that David claimed was better for his back. Her small collection of gardening tools, meticulously cared for and inherited from her own mother, disappeared from the shed, never to be seen again. A set of delicate porcelain dishes, a wedding gift from Thomas's aunt, now bore an alarming number of chips and cracks, testament to careless handling. When Eleanor would gently point these things out, Clara and David would shrug, often with a dismissive wave of the hand. "Don't be so uptight, Mom, it's just stuff." But it wasn't just stuff, it was her history, her comfort, her memories being systematically dismantled, piece by piece. Beyond the emotional toll, there was the crushing financial burden. Her modest pension, once perfectly adequate for her solitary needs, was now stretched to cover 5 people. Groceries, utilities, council tax, all soared. She watched her savings, the nest egg Thomas had so carefully built, dwindle with alarming speed. When the water heater burst one winter, leaving them without hot water for days, she had drained a significant portion of her emergency fund to replace it. "We'll pay you back when we can, Mom," Clara had said, a promise as hollow as a drum. Eleanor knew she would never see that money again. The final insidious layer was the undermining of her mental acuity. Increasingly, she overheard hushed conversations between Clara and David late at night. "Mom's getting so forgetful, isn't she?" Clara would whisper. "She misplaces things, repeats herself. We really need to start thinking about her care options." The implication was clear. Eleanor was becoming a burden, a doddering old woman who needed to be managed, perhaps even move to an assisted living facility. But Eleanor wasn't forgetful. She remembered every slight, every broken promise, every dollar spent. She remembered the crumpled photo in the trash. She felt deliberately undermined, her competence questioned to justify their continued control over her life and her home. The legal papers on her desk were not just documents. They were her declaration of war, her quiet reclamation of a life systematically stolen. The past 3 days of reflection had not swayed her. They had only hardened her resolve. The quiet afternoon calm was abruptly shattered by a jarring slam that echoed through the house, rattling the very foundations of Eleanor's fragile peace. Before she could even register the sound, her bedroom door burst open without so much as a perfunctory knock, revealing David, Clara's husband, his face a mask of frantic irritation. He was half-dressed, his tie askew, and his usually slicked-back hair was disheveled. "Eleanor, have you seen my suit jacket?" he demanded, his voice sharp with impatience, bypassing any pretense of greeting. "The gray one. Clara said she was organizing the closets again, and now I can't find a thing." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly stressed. Eleanor felt a familiar prickle of annoyance. Organizing the closets was Clara's euphemism for clearing out Eleanor's belongings to make space for their overflowing wardrobes. Her own modest closet, once filled with her cherished clothes, was now crammed with Clara's designer dresses and David's myriad sports jerseys, leaving Eleanor's things relegated to a small, dusty corner. "Perhaps you should try the hall closet, David," Eleanor suggested, her voice carefully neutral, though her fingers tightened almost imperceptibly on the armrest of her chair. "Clara often moves things there when she's organizing." David grumbled, a low, frustrated sound, already halfway out the door. "Ugh, I'm going to be late for this interview. This is exactly what I don't need right now." He paused, turning back, his eyes narrowing slightly as he regarded Eleanor. "And speaking of things, Ethan mentioned something about you seeing a lawyer the other day. Arthur Hayes, wasn't it?" Eleanor's heart gave a little lurch. She hadn't realized Ethan had overheard. She tried to appear unconcerned. "Oh, that was just some personal paperwork, David. Nothing for you to worry about." She offered a small, reassuring smile that felt utterly fake on her lips. But David's suspicion, once piqued, was not easily allayed. He stepped back into the room, leaning against the doorframe, his posture suddenly more predatory. "Personal paperwork, huh? Well, just so we're clear, Eleanor, if there's anything at all about the house or anything affecting our living situation, you should talk to us first. We're family after all. We need to be in the loop." The thinly veiled threat in his voice was unmistakable. He wasn't concerned for her. He was concerned for their comfortable, rent-free existence. Eleanor simply nodded, her hand instinctively reaching toward the stack of legal papers on her desk. Her fingers trembled slightly as they grazed the crisp edges. David watched her for a moment longer, then seemed to shrug off his suspicions, the urgency of his interview overriding his curiosity. With another frustrated sigh, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Eleanor to the sudden silence. She had barely had a moment to compose herself when a sharp, shattering crash echoed from downstairs. It was the sound of ceramic meeting hardwood, a sound that made her stomach clench with dread. She hurried down the stairs, her mind already conjuring images of destruction. In the living room, Sophia, her 5-year-old granddaughter, stood amidst a glittering constellation of white shards. Her face was contorted in a surprised grimace, her bottom lip trembling. At her feet, shattered into 100 irreparable pieces, lay Eleanor's treasured wedding gift bowl. It was a delicate, hand-painted ceramic piece, a cherished memento from Thomas's aunt, a piece that had graced their dining table for over 50 years. Sophia looked up at Eleanor, tears welling in her big, innocent eyes. "It slipped, Grandma. I was just trying to reach the cookies." She gestured vaguely toward the mantelpiece where Clara often hid treats from the children. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, her voice a childish echo of an adult's casual cruelty, "Mommy says you have too many old things anyway. We should get some new ones." Eleanor froze. The words, uttered with such innocent candor, struck her with the force of a physical blow. Too many old things. The implication was clear. Painful. Was she too one of those old things Clara wished to discard? to replace with something newer, more convenient. The shattered bowl felt like a metaphor for her own fractured existence within these walls. The anger, so carefully banked, flared hotter, fiercer than before. That evening, a storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest within Eleanor's heart. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a mournful spirit. She lay in her bed, listening to the muffled voices from Clara and David's room, a thin wall separating her from their intimate conversation. Their voices, usually hushed, were now slightly elevated, carried by the rising wind. She met Arthur Hayes, David. Clara's voice, sharp with concern, cut through the sounds of the storm. Ethan heard her. She said it was personal paperwork. But who meets a lawyer for personal paperwork after 7 years of nothing? She's up to something. David's voice, lower and more calculating, responded. What if she's thinking of selling, Clara? This house is worth a fortune. Or worse, what if she's changing her will? We've made so many sacrifices for her, living here, taking care of her. Eleanor's eyes welled with bitter tears, not of sadness, but of profound understanding. Their concern was not for her well-being, her future, her happiness. It was for her property, her assets, the house they had come to view as their own inheritance. Their right. She was not their mother, their benefactor. She was merely a temporary custodian of their future wealth, an obstacle to be managed. She squeezed her eyes shut, seeing herself not as the matriarch of her family, but as a prisoner in her own home, trapped by unspoken expectations and the casual cruelty of her own flesh and blood. The house, her sanctuary, had become her gilded cage. Just then, a brilliant flash of lightning illuminated her room, followed almost immediately by a deafening clap of thunder. In that blinding instant, a profound clarity washed over Eleanor. The fear that had held her back for so long, the apprehension of confrontation, dissipated like smoke. The crumpled photo, the dismissed birthday, the shattered bowl, David's subtle threat, and now their overheard conversation. Each was a nail driven into the coffin of her old life. The storm outside was a prelude, a cleansing. Tomorrow, she thought, a fierce, unwavering resolve hardening her spirit. Tomorrow, I would present the papers. The morning after the storm broke, both outside and within, Eleanor woke with a profound sense of clarity and an almost unnerving calm. The decision had been made, the path illuminated by the previous night's lightning. There was no going back, only forward. She rose from her bed, the stiffness in her joints a familiar complaint, but her spirit felt lighter, infused with a quiet, steely resolve. She descended to the kitchen and began her usual morning ritual, preparing breakfast for the household. The scent of coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of maple syrup and butter as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. Soon Ethan, her 7-year-old grandson, bounded in, his face lighting up at the sight. "Grandma, are those blueberry pancakes? My favorite!" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with delight. "You always remember." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. "Of course, sweetheart. How could I forget?" She cherished these small moments, these connections with her grandchildren. She remembered their favorite colors, their preferred bedtime stories, the specific way they liked their toast. These were the details Clara and David often overlooked, too absorbed in their own lives to notice the nuances of their children's joys. It was a stark contrast to how little attention they paid to Eleanor herself, to her needs, her preferences, her very presence. Clara shuffled in moments later, her usual morning grumpiness amplified. She immediately began rummaging through the refrigerator, her back to Eleanor. "Ugh, is there no good yogurt left? And Mom, I need the car today. David has his second interview, and he absolutely can't be late. He'll need it all day." She spoke with an air of absolute entitlement, as if Eleanor's car, the one Thomas had bought for her, was merely a shared family utility. Eleanor turned from the stove, a spatula still in her hand. Her voice was steady, calm, devoid of the usual hesitation or apology. "I'm sorry, Clara, but I have an appointment this afternoon myself. I'll need the car." Clara stopped rummaging, her head snapping up. She stared at Eleanor as if she had suddenly started speaking in a foreign language. "An appointment? What on earth appointment could possibly be so important, Mom?" "You never have appointments." Her tone was dismissive, incredulous. carrying the underlying message that Eleanor's life was simply not important enough to warrant such an inconvenience. Eleanor met her daughter's gaze, her expression unyielding. "It's an important one? And speaking of important matters, I need to speak with both you and David this evening after the children are in bed. Say, 8:30? She delivered the message with the quiet authority of a general issuing an order. Clara's eyes narrowed, a flicker of suspicion crossing her features. The carefree indignation of moments before vanished, replaced by a guarded tension. She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it, perhaps sensing an uncharacteristic steel in Eleanor's demeanor. She simply nodded curtly, then turned back to the refrigerator, though her movements were now slower, more thoughtful. Throughout the morning, Eleanor could hear the hushed whispers from the hallway, then from Clara and David's bedroom. They were strategizing, she knew. Their voices were low, punctuated by sharp exclamations and moments of heavy silence. She imagined them dissecting her words, trying to decipher the meaning behind her sudden assertiveness. David's earlier warning, his concern about the house, resonated in her mind. They were undoubtedly preparing for a confrontation, anticipating some demand or complaint, but wholly unprepared for the true nature of what was coming. For a brief, fleeting moment, a sliver of doubt, a shadow of fear crept into Eleanor's heart. What if they retaliated? What if they tried to weaponize the children, making her visits impossible, or worse, turning Ethan and Sophia against her? The thought was a cold knot in her stomach. She loved her grandchildren fiercely. They were the only true light in her otherwise subdued life. But then her gaze fell upon the small, ornate photo frame on her bedside table. Within it was the crumpled photograph, now smoothed out and carefully placed behind the glass. It was a stark reminder of her slow, systematic erasure, a visual testament to the disrespect and disregard she had endured. The image of her younger, vibrant self, smiling beside Thomas, fueled her resolve. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for the memory of the woman she once was, for the legacy she deserved. With a renewed sense of purpose, Eleanor retrieved the legal papers from her writing desk. She folded them meticulously, then slipped them into her handbag, the soft leather muffling the crisp rustle of the documents. The act was deliberate, definitive. She was ready. The rest of the day passed in a peculiar tension. David returned from his interview, radiating a false air of confidence, too busy recounting the triumphs of his hypothetical new job to press Eleanor further about her meeting. Clara, however, remained unusually quiet. Her eyes, whenever they met Eleanor's, held a watchful, suspicious glint. She moved through the house with a palpable edginess, as if waiting for a shoe to drop, for the other side of Eleanor's sudden assertiveness to reveal itself. As evening descended and the children were finally tucked into bed, the air grew thick with unspoken anticipation. At precisely 8:30 p.m., Eleanor went to the kitchen and prepared a pot of chamomile tea, a deliberate ritual of normalcy amidst the brewing storm. She carried the tray into the living room, setting it on the coffee table. Clara and David were already there, seated on the sofa. Clara had her arms crossed defensively over her chest, her posture rigid, her face a carefully constructed mask of skeptical patience. David sat beside her, trying to project an air of relaxed nonchalance, though the nervous fidgeting of his foot betrayed his unease. The stage was set. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The air in the living room was thick with unspoken tension, the silence punctuated only by the soft tick of the grandfather clock in the hall and the distant hum of the refrigerator. Clara and David watched Eleanor, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and defiant skepticism. If you've been following my journey, you know this moment has been a long time coming. Keep watching to see how it unfolds, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to hear the rest of my story. Eleanor took a slow, steadying breath, the scent of chamomile tea, a familiar comfort. Her hands, despite the tremor of adrenaline, remained firm as she reached into her handbag. She withdrew the legal documents, their crisp edges a stark contrast to the soft floral pattern of the coffee table runner, and placed them carefully in front of Clara and David. "I've been thinking a lot about our living arrangement," she began, her voice calm and clear, though she could feel the thrumming of her own pulse in her ears. David, ever the more outwardly aggressive of the two, immediately tensed. His eyes narrowed, reflecting the flickering lamplight. What about it, Eleanor? He asked, his tone laced with a barely concealed impatience. It's been 7 years, Eleanor stated, her gaze unwavering as it met Clara's. She wanted to remind them of the initial promise, the few months that had stretched into nearly a decade. 7 years since you moved in after Thomas passed away, promising it would be temporary. Clara scoffed, her arms tightening across her chest. So that's what this is? You're what, evicting us? Your own family? Her voice rose in pitch, an edge of indignation already creeping in. I'm not evicting anyone, Eleanor clarified, cutting through Clara's dramatic accusation. I'm proposing that we formalize our arrangement, moving forward. I've had Arthur Hayes draw up some options. She gently pushed the documents across the table. You have two choices. The first is a rental agreement. It's for a fair, below-market rent, plus your share of the utilities. The second option is 6 months to find alternative housing, during which time I expect you to begin contributing to the household expenses, proportionate to your usage. The silence that followed was deafening, heavy and suffocating. David's face, usually pale, began to redden with suppressed fury, while Clara's drained of color, leaving her features stark and shocked. They stared at the papers, then at Eleanor, as if she had suddenly transformed into a stranger. You can't be serious, Clara whispered, the words barely audible, her voice trembling. I'm very serious, Eleanor replied, her voice firm, unwavering. She had prepared for this. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind. Suddenly, David slammed his hand down on the coffee table, making the teacups rattle. This is our home, he roared, his eyes blazing with anger. We live here. We've made our lives here. You can't just throw us out. No, David, Eleanor asserted, her voice gaining strength, refusing to be cowed by his outburst. This is my home. It was Thomas's in my home. It is fully paid for in my name. You have lived here rent-free for 7 years, contributing nothing financially and very little otherwise. Clara, finding her voice, joined the fray, her tone sharp and indignant. But we're family, Mom. We take care of each other. That's what families do. Do you take care of me? Eleanor challenged, her voice piercing through Clara's self-righteousness. Do you truly believe you've been taking care of me? Or have you simply been taking advantage? She paused, letting the question hang in the air. I've endured 7 years of disrespect. My belongings discarded, my privacy invaded, my very presence in my own home treated as an inconvenience. Clara scoffed again. That's unfair, Mom. We manage the household. We've made so many improvements. You couldn't possibly handle all this on your own? Improvements? Eleanor countered, a wry, humorless smile playing on her lips. You mean painting over the wallpaper Thomas and I chose, throwing out my armchair, chipping my wedding china? Those kinds of improvements? She shook her head. Let's be clear about who has been contributing. I've cooked, I've cleaned, I've done the laundry, I've babysat your children nearly every single day without complaint, and I've paid for every single soaring bill for a household of 5 people. My pension, which was meant for my comfortable retirement, has been depleted, and my savings were drained for a new water heater that you promised to repay. David interjected, his voice dripping with condescension. So that's what this is about, money. We knew it. Always about money with you, Eleanor. No, David, Eleanor stated, looking him directly in the eye. It's not about money. It's about respect. It's about dignity. It's about recognizing that I am not just a free housekeeper or an ATM. I am your mother, Clara. I am a person with a right to my own life, my own space, and my own memories. She reached into her handbag again, this time pulling out the carefully smoothed out, crumpled photograph. She placed it on top of the legal documents, facing Clara. And it's about this, Clara. A picture of me and your father, crumpled and thrown into the trash because some people don't deserve to be remembered. Those were your words, weren't they? As innocently relayed by your own son, Ethan. Clara flinched, her eyes widening in a mixture of shock and guilt. She opened her mouth, stammering, That's a child's misunderstanding, Mom. You know how children distort things. Do they? Eleanor challenged, her voice still quiet but potent. Or do they simply repeat what they hear, what they learn? David, seeing Clara cornered, tried to intervene, his voice now attempting a placating tone. Eleanor, these documents, this is extreme. It's unnecessary. We can talk about things. We're family. We could have talked about things for 7 years, David, Eleanor responded, her gaze sweeping over both of them. I've tried, I've dropped hints, I've made suggestions, I've quietly absorbed every slight, but you never listened. You never saw me. You only saw what you could take. David slumped back against the sofa cushions, defeated for a moment. Then a spark of defiance returned to his eyes. So what happens if we refuse? You'll just throw us out on the street? Is that it? Eleanor met his gaze unflinchingly. No, David, as I said, I'm giving you options and time. 6 months if you choose not to enter into a rental agreement. Clara, her face now blotchy and streaked with tears, suddenly sprang up from the sofa. I can't believe this, she shrieked, her voice cracking. After everything we've done for you, Mom, all our sacrifices, this is how you repay us? She ran from the room, her angry sobs echoing down the hallway. David stood up, walking closer to Eleanor. He leaned in, his voice a low, menacing growl meant only for her ears. You'll regret this, Eleanor. I promise you that. Then he turned and followed Clara, leaving Eleanor alone in the quiet living room. Despite the confrontation, despite the threats, Eleanor felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. The air, once thick with unspoken resentment, now felt clear, breathable. She had finally stood up for herself. The first and hardest step had been taken. The morning after the confrontation, Eleanor awoke to a house shrouded in an eerie, profound silence. It wasn't the comforting quiet she sometimes enjoyed, but a heavy, deliberate absence of sound. A cold war had been declared. Clara and David had evidently decided on a calculated freeze-out. Their voices were clipped, their movements hurried. They left early, taking the children with them, without so much as a glance in Eleanor's direction. The air was thick with their unspoken resentment, a palpable force that filled every room. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor was watering her small patch of petunias in the front yard, her neighbor Brenda strolled over, her hands tucked into the pockets of her gardening apron. Brenda, a woman of sharp wit and an even sharper eye, had lived next door for decades. Well, it's certainly quiet today, Brenda remarked, her gaze sweeping over the driveway, noticeably empty of Clara's minivan. Children not home from school yet? Eleanor sighed, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Brenda was family, in all but name. No, Brenda, they are not. I asked Clara and David to either start paying rent or find somewhere else to live. Brenda's eyes widened slightly, then a slow smile spread across her face. Well, it's about time, Eleanor. That's been coming for years, if you ask me. Good for you. Her words were a balm, an affirmation that Eleanor hadn't been imagining the years of neglect. I'm worried about the children, Eleanor confessed, her voice thick with emotion. What if they try to keep them from me? Brenda placed a reassuring hand on Eleanor's arm. Don't you dare back down, Eleanor. Not now. Those children love you. They'll find a way. Her steadfast support bolstered Eleanor's resolve, reminding her that she was not alone. The house, however, felt cavernous without the children's laughter and chatter. Every echo seemed to amplify the silence. Every empty space a reminder of their absence. But Eleanor knew this was part of Clara's manipulation, a tactic to make her feel guilty, to make her cave. She wouldn't succumb. Not this time. The first volley of Clara's psychological warfare arrived that evening in the form of a phone call from Eleanor's sister, Sarah, who lived across the country in Arizona. Sarah's voice, usually warm and gossipy, was strained with thinly veiled accusation. Eleanor, what on earth is going on? Sarah began, skipping pleasantries entirely. Clara just called me, absolutely distraught, said you're forcing them out of their home, after all the improvements they've made to the house too. Eleanor closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She could almost hear Clara's tearful, exaggerated narrative. Sarah, they haven't made improvements. They've redecorated according to their taste, often at the expense of my own sentimental items. And it's not their home, it's my home. And they've lived here rent-free for 7 years while I've been covering all the bills and expenses on my pension. She detailed her financial contributions, The depleted savings, the unspoken expectation that she would simply disappear into the background. Sarah, however, seemed disinclined to listen. While Clara says she's worried about your mental state, Eleanor, she says you've been forgetful and paranoid, says you're not yourself. The accusation, so carefully planted by Clara, hung heavy in the air. Eleanor's jaw tightened. I am perfectly lucid, Sarah, I assure you. My memory is quite intact. I remember perfectly well what has transpired over these past 7 years. If you're so concerned, why don't you come visit? See for yourself? She knew Sarah wouldn't, preferring the distant drama to the inconvenient truth. I've been too accommodating for too long, Sarah, Eleanor quietly concluded, ending the call shortly after. Over the next few days, 3 more relatives called, each relaying similar accusations, each echoing Clara's carefully constructed narrative of Eleanor's supposed mental decline and her heartless eviction of her own family. Her niece Emily was particularly harsh, accusing Eleanor of being an ungrateful old woman who was selfish for not wanting her family around. The psychological pressure was immense, a calculated attack on her reputation and her sanity. Then on the 3rd afternoon, the doorbell rang. Eleanor's heart leaped. When she opened the door, there stood Ethan, her grandson, a small backpack clutched tightly in his hands, his eyes wide and a little fearful. "Grandma," he whispered, looking past her into the quiet house. "Can I come in? I wanted to see you." Eleanor knelt down, her heart aching at the sight of him. "Of course, sweetheart. Come in." Always. She led him into the living room, sensing his unease. "What's wrong, Ethan?" He looked up at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Mommy and Daddy said you were sick, Grandma, and confused and saying mean things. They said I shouldn't come here." Eleanor's blood ran cold. This was Clara's true malice, turning the children against her. She hugged Ethan tightly, her voice gentle but firm. "Listen to me, Ethan. I am not sick or confused. I am not saying mean things, and I will always, always want you and Sophia in my life. Your mommy and daddy and I are just trying to figure out some healthy boundaries for our family, like when you knock on my door before coming in, because that's respecting my space. It's just like that, but for grown-ups." Before Ethan could fully process her words, Clara's minivan screeched to a halt in the driveway. Clara and David burst through the front door, their faces contorted with fury. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Clara shrieked, her eyes blazing. "Why didn't you call us? We've been looking for him everywhere." "I tried to call you, Clara," Eleanor replied calmly, her gaze steady, "but your number seems to have changed." "I tried your old one." She watched Clara's face, catching the fleeting moment of realization, the flash of guilt at her own petty maneuver to cut off communication. Clara snatched Ethan by the hand, pulling him towards the door. "Come on, Ethan, we're leaving. You're not to come here anymore unless we say so." As they left, Eleanor knew this was just the beginning. They were escalating their tactics, weaponizing her greatest love. Minutes later, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from Clara. A photo of Ethan and Sophia smiling innocently was attached. Beneath it, a chilling message. "Remember what's at stake." Eleanor crumpled to the floor, tears finally streaming down her face. Clara wasn't just using the children as leverage, she was holding them hostage. And Eleanor, for the first time in days, felt a profound, suffocating fear. 2 weeks stretched into an eternity, each day a new battle in the silent war Clara and David had declared. Eleanor found herself exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the constant psychological drain. Their Cold War tactics had escalated into active sabotage, their primary weapon being the children. Eleanor's time with Ethan and Sophia was severely restricted, snatched moments when she could sneak in a hug or a quiet word, always under the watchful, resentful eyes of her daughter and son-in-law. One afternoon, she overheard Ethan's small voice from the kitchen. "Why can't we see Grandma anymore?" It was a question that broke her heart, fueling her fear, but hardening her resolve. Then, a call from Brenda, her neighbor, shifted the battlefield entirely. "Eleanor, honey, I don't mean to pry, but I overheard David talking on the phone. He was pretty loud and our windows were open." Brenda's voice lowered conspiratorially. "He was talking about getting the house appraised, and he specifically said for when they take over the property." A cold, icy fury settled in Eleanor's stomach, a sensation far more potent than the initial anger. Take over the property. It wasn't just about disrespect or free rent or convenience. It was about outright ownership. They weren't waiting for her to pass. They were actively planning to seize her home, perhaps even expecting it. The pieces clicked into place, the whispers of her mental state, the attempts to undermine her, the careful isolation. They weren't just trying to control her, they were trying to remove her. Without hesitation, Eleanor called Arthur Hayes. She recounted Brenda's words, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Arthur listened patiently, then reassured her. Eleanor, while you are alive and of sound mind, they cannot take over your house. It is legally yours. However, he cautioned, his voice grave, it's not uncommon for adult children, when they feel their inheritance is threatened, to attempt to declare a parent incompetent. Do you have a recent clean bill of health? Yes, Eleanor confirmed, a surge of relief mixed with simmering anger. I just had my annual physical last month. Everything is perfectly fine. Excellent, Arthur replied. Keep those records. And I would strongly advise reviewing your will immediately. Ensure it reflects your current wishes explicitly. We can also add clauses regarding visitation rights for the grandchildren, should it come to that, though such clauses can be difficult to enforce without further legal action. Eleanor thanked him, her mind already racing. She hung up and went straight to her small, fireproof safe in the back of her closet. She retrieved her will, a document carefully crafted with Thomas decades ago, leaving everything to Clara. It needed immediate revision. As she held it, her eyes fell upon an old framed photo on her dresser. Clara's graduation picture, her daughter beaming, full of youthful promise. Had David changed her so much, or had this insidious entitlement always simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the opportune moment to erupt? Later that evening, Clara returned alone. Her usual dramatic entrance was replaced by a subdued quietness. She found Eleanor in the living room, sketching in her notebook, a hobby she'd recently rediscovered. Mom, Clara began, her voice unusually soft, we need to talk. Eleanor merely nodded, closing her sketchbook. Clara sat opposite her on the outdated floral sofa, the one she'd repeatedly suggested Eleanor replace. David and I have been discussing your proposal, Clara said, voiding Eleanor's gaze. We understand your concerns about money, so we're willing to pay you $400 a month for rent. She offered the amount with an air of generosity, as if it were a significant concession. Eleanor slowly put down her pencil. $400, she echoed, her voice devoid of emotion. Clara, do you have any idea what market rent is in this neighborhood? Do you realize how much the utilities for a house this size cost? For a family of 4 who have lived here for 7 years, completely free, while I've borne the entire financial burden? She watched Clara, a slow burn starting in her chest. Where is all your money going, Clara? David has a good job. You always seem to have money for new clothes, for your salon appointments, for your social club. Clara stiffened, her face hardening. Fine then. 600. That's our final offer. Eleanor met her gaze, a deep sigh escaping her lips. Arthur Hayes, my attorney, has drafted an agreement for $1,200 a month, plus your share of the utilities and renter's insurance. That is a fair, below-market rate, Clara, and it is non-negotiable. Clara's voice rose, losing its subdued tone. That's ridiculous. We're family, Mom, not tenants. You can't treat us like this. Family respects boundaries, Clara, Eleanor stated, her voice firm. Family doesn't erase members from photo albums. Family doesn't spread lies about their mother's mental decline to other relatives. Family doesn't plot to take over her property. Clara's eyes darted away. The photo was a misunderstanding, I told you. Ethan just... I'm past that, Clara, Eleanor interrupted, cutting off the flimsy excuse. What I'm not past is the complete lack of respect, the financial exploitation, and the deliberate emotional manipulation. She reached for a large envelope she had prepared earlier, sliding it across the coffee table. Inside this envelope are 2 documents. One is the rental agreement at the terms I've specified. The other is a formal notice to vacate in 60 days, along with a list of reputable local realtors and apartment complexes, should you choose that option. Clara stared at the envelope, then at Eleanor, her eyes welling with tears. How can you do this, Mom? To your own grandchildren? To Ethan and Sophia? I'm not doing this to my grandchildren, Clara, Eleanor responded, her voice unwavering. I am establishing healthy boundaries belatedly after years of being taken advantage of. I am reclaiming my home and my life. My relationship with Ethan and Sophia is entirely up to you. You can choose to foster it, or you can choose to use them as pawns. Eleanor felt a sudden, fierce surge of anger, snapping. For 7 years, I've cleaned your messes, cooked your meals, raised your children, and funded your lifestyle. While you enjoyed your clubs and your holidays, I've been worried sick about how to pay for the next utility bill. Your consumption, your entitlement, has drained me dry, Clara. Financially, emotionally, physically. Clara's face contorted in a mask of pure venom. Dad would be ashamed of you. He'd be furious, she spat, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor held her gaze. Your father, she said, her voice laced with an unexpected calm, valued self-respect, Clara. He valued integrity. He would be heartbroken at how you've treated your own mother and how you've allowed your family to degrade his memory in this home. Clara snatched the envelope, clutching it to her chest. We'll look these over, she bit out, her voice trembling with rage. But don't expect us to just roll over, Mom. This isn't over. She rose to leave. The terms aren't negotiable, Clara, Eleanor called after her, her voice ringing with finality. Either sign the agreement within 1 week or give me your move-out date within the next 60 days. Clara paused at the doorway, turning back, her eyes narrowed into slits of cold fury. Her ultimate threat, delivered with chilling precision. If you force us out, Eleanor, you might never see Ethan and Sophia again. Think about that. Eleanor's heart clenched, but she held her ground. That would be your choice, Clara, not mine. The morning after Clara's final chilling threat, Eleanor called Arthur Hayes again. Her resolve to protect herself and her assets was stronger than ever. She instructed Arthur to revise her will immediately. The house, her beloved sanctuary, would no longer go directly to Clara. Instead, the proceeds from its eventual sale would be placed into a trust for Ethan and Sophia, to be used for their education and future, and a significant portion would be donated to the local charities she believed in. Clara would receive nothing directly. A direct consequence of her actions and her insidious plot to take over the property. 3 days later, the house, usually a cacophony of voices and activity, hummed with a different kind of sound. The muffled thud of boxes, the soft scrape of furniture. Clara and David were silently packing. Eleanor heard them, but she didn't interfere. She stayed in her room, a book open on her lap, listening to the quiet dismantling of their temporary life within her walls. Finally, Clara appeared at Eleanor's door, her face a peculiar mixture of defiance and a grudging defeat. We're moving out, she announced, her voice flat. Since you've made it clear we're not welcome here anymore. The veiled accusation was still there, an attempt to shift blame, to make Eleanor feel guilty. David, appearing behind her, interjected with an air of strained cheerfulness. Yep, found a great new place. We'll be out next weekend. It all happened so fast. He spoke vaguely of an apartment complex across town, a convenient, if unconvincing, explanation for their surprisingly rapid departure. Eleanor kept her face neutral, a flicker of suspicion already igniting in her mind. An apartment complex? It seemed too swift, too neat. Later that day, Brenda called, her voice buzzing with excitement. Eleanor, you'll never believe what I just heard from Carol down the street. David's parents bought a condo, a big, beautiful one across town. Clara and David are moving in there rent-free, of course. Brenda chuckled, a knowing sound. They've been going around telling everyone you're kicking them out, and they've had to scramble to find a place, all while laughing about how they won't have to pay a demi in rent. Eleanor felt a wry, almost bittersweet smile touch her lips. The lie, the continued manipulation, didn't surprise her. It solidified her decision. She wouldn't confront them about the deception. Their willing departure, even under false pretenses, was more valuable than the petty satisfaction of exposing their lies. Let them cling to their narrative of victimhood if it made them leave. Over the next few days, the packing continued. Eleanor watched Clara and David load boxes, and occasionally she noticed some of her own smaller items disappearing into their boxes. A cherished vase, a set of decorative coasters, a few family photo albums that weren't meant for the trash. She let it go. They were small prices to pay, she reasoned, for her freedom. Ethan and Sophia were predictably confused by the sudden upheaval. "Why can't you come with us, Grandma?" Sophia asked, her small face creased with worry as Eleanor helped her pack a box of toys. Eleanor hugged her tightly. "Grandma needs to stay here, sweetheart, but I promise I'll see you very, very often." She wondered with a pang in her heart if Clara would allow it. Moving day arrived, a flurry of activity and the rumble of a moving truck. Eleanor stayed in the kitchen, sipping tea, watching from the window as her home slowly, perceptibly, lightened. Each box carried out, each piece of furniture removed, felt like a breath of fresh air, a burden lifted. David gave her a curt nod, a mumbled goodbye, before driving off. Clara, however, hesitated at the door of the minivan. "The kids want to say goodbye," she said, her voice unusually soft, almost tentative. Ethan and Sophia ran to Eleanor, hugging her legs. "We'll see Grandma soon, right, Mommy?" Ethan asked, looking up at Clara, his face earnest. Clara paused, a moment of palpable tension hanging in the air. Eleanor held her breath. Then Clara surprised her. "Yes," she said, her voice a little strained but clear. "We'll figure out a regular visiting schedule. Don't worry, sweethearts." Relief so profound it almost buckled Eleanor's knees, washed over her. That small concession, that promise, meant everything. As the minivan pulled away, Eleanor walked through her now echoing, half-empty home. The silence was no longer heavy. It was filled with possibility, with the quiet hum of her own presence. That evening, as Eleanor sat on her porch swing, gazing at the sunset, her phone buzzed. It was a video call from Ethan. She answered, and her grandson's excited face filled the screen. "Grandma, look at my new place," he exclaimed, holding the phone up and spinning around, showing off a spacious, beautifully furnished condo, complete with a gleaming kitchen and a view of the city skyline. It was clearly not the apartment complex David had vaguely alluded to. Eleanor didn't comment on the deception. She simply smiled, enjoying Ethan's unadulterated joy. A moment later, Clara's face appeared on the screen, her expression neutral. "Just wanted the kids to check in," she said, almost as if she were fulfilling an obligation. "David's parents offered us their condo for a while." Even then, she couldn't quite bring herself to tell the whole truth, still adding an unnecessary lie, omitting the purchase aspect. Eleanor simply nodded, choosing to preserve this fragile moment of civil communication. "That's very kind of them," she replied. "I could bring the kids by this weekend if you're free," Clara offered, her voice still cautious. "I'd like that very much, Clara," Eleanor replied, her voice thick with emotion. Months later, a new rhythm settled into Eleanor's life. Regular visits with Ethan and Sophia became a cherished part of her week. She reclaimed her home, converting Clara's old room into a bright, airy sewing room, repainting the living room in soft, comforting blues. She reconnected with old friends, joined a book club, and even started dating a kind widower named George she met at the senior center. Her life, once compressed and defined by the needs of others, expanded, filling the spaces with her own choices, her own joys. Then, a year after the confrontation, Clara called. Her voice was hesitant, laced with a vulnerability Eleanor hadn't heard in years. "Mom," she began, a shaky breath audible. I wasn't fair to you. Not at all. I know that now. I always felt entitled to your house, to your help, to everything you had." Eleanor's heart tightened. "What changed, Clara?" she asked gently, giving her daughter the space to explain. Clara sighed, a deep, weary sound. "David's parents came back from their extended trip, and well, living in with them is challenging. They're very particular, very demanding. They expect us to do everything for them, and they criticize every move we make. I think," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper, "I think I finally understand how you must have felt." Clara apologized, a genuine, heartfelt apology that Eleanor knew had been a long, painful journey for her daughter to articulate. Eleanor knew trust would take time to rebuild, but it was a start. It means a lot to hear you say that, Clara, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, not of sadness, but of profound healing. In her vibrant garden, now lovingly tended, Eleanor reflected on the quiet triumph. At 69, she had learned that standing up for herself wasn't selfish. It was necessary. It was healing. It was love, not just for herself, but for the future of her family, by demonstrating the importance of respect and boundaries. She was finally Eleanor,